Marcus Thompson sat quietly in the corner of the crowded coffee shop, his withered hands wrapped around a steaming cup. The bustling sounds of the morning rush filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in memories that felt both distant and painfully close. At 52, his once powerful frame still carried the disciplined posture of his military days, though deep lines now marked his face like a roadmap of experiences most people couldn't imagine. The diagnosis had come 6 months ago. Early onset Alzheimer's disease. The words had hit him harder than any enemy fire he'd ever faced during his 25 years as a Navy SEAL. Dr. Martinez had explained it gently, using medical terms that felt foreign and cold. Progressive memory loss. Cognitive decline. No cure. Marcus had listened with the same stoic expression he'd worn through countless briefings, but, inside, something fundamental had shattered. His daughter Sarah had insisted he move closer to her family in Portland. She meant well, but Marcus felt like a stranger in this peaceful suburban world. The manicured lawns and quiet streets were a stark contrast to the places he'd served, the dusty mountains of Afghanistan, the humid jungles of South America, the scorching deserts where he'd led his team through missions that would never appear in any official records. "Dad, you need to accept help," Sarah had said just yesterday, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when they think you're fragile. She'd hired a caregiver, a kind woman named Mrs. Chun, who spoke to him like he was already gone, already lost to the disease that was slowly stealing pieces of his mind. Marcus took another sip of his coffee, tasting the bitter warmth. Some days were better than others. Today felt foggy, like trying to see through smoke. He'd woken up confused about where he was, standing in Sarah's guest bedroom wondering why nothing looked familiar. It had taken him several minutes to remember the move, the diagnosis, the way his life had been quietly rearranged around his failing mind. The coffee shop door chimed, and a group of college students entered, their laughter bright and carefree. Marcus watched them claim a large table near the window, spreading out textbooks and laptops with the confident energy of people who believed the world was full of possibilities. One young man reminded him of Tommy, his youngest team member who'd been killed in action 7 years ago. The resemblance was so strong it made Marcus's chest tighten. He closed his eyes, and suddenly, he was back in that compound in Syria, the sound of gunfire echoing off stone walls. Tommy had been covering their exit, his rifle steady despite the chaos around them. Marcus could still hear his voice over the radio. "Tango team, this is Whiskey 2, all clear on the west side." 3 minutes later, Tommy was gone, taken out by a sniper they never saw coming. "Sir? Are you all right?" Marcus opened his eyes to find one of the coffee shop employees standing beside his table, a young woman with concerned eyes and a name tag that read Jessica. He realized he'd been gripping his cup so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "I'm fine," he said, forcing his hands to relax. "Just thinking." Jessica hesitated, clearly unsure whether to believe him. "Would you like another coffee? This one's getting cold." Marcus looked down at his cup, surprised to see she was right. He had no memory of when he'd stopped drinking it. These gaps were happening more frequently now, minutes or sometimes hours that simply vanished from his awareness like they'd never existed. "Thank you," he said, managing a small smile. "That would be nice." As Jessica walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. Dr. Martinez had suggested he write things down, create external memories to help when his internal ones failed. The list was already long: Sarah's address, 1247 Oak Street, emergency contact, Sarah Thompson Walsh, 503-555-0147, medication, take blue pills with breakfast, white pills with dinner. Important, you are Marcus Thompson. You served in the Navy for 25 years. You have Alzheimer's disease. The last note made him pause. He'd written it himself, but it felt like reading about a stranger. Was this really his life now? Reduced to bullet points and reminders, his decades of service and sacrifice condensed into a few clinical facts? Jessica returned with fresh coffee, and Marcus thanked her again. She lingered for a moment, and he could see she wanted to say something more. Instead, she just smiled and returned to her work behind the counter. Marcus pulled out a small leather journal from his jacket pocket. It was a gift from his old commanding officer, Colonel Richards, who'd visited him shortly after the diagnosis. "Write it all down," Richards had said. "Every mission, every brother you served with, every moment that mattered.
Don't let the disease take that away from you.
The journal was already half full with his careful handwriting, stories from his years as a SEAL that he was determined to preserve before they slipped away forever. He opened to a fresh page and began to write, Operation Nightfall, November 2008.
Helmand Province, Afghanistan.
Team Leader, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson. Mission, extract high-value target from Taliban compound. The words flowed easier than expected, muscle memory guiding his hand even as his mind struggled with the present. He could see it all clearly, the desert night sky, the weight of his gear, the steady breathing of his team as they moved through enemy territory. These memories felt more real than the coffee shop around him, more substantial than the morning light streaming through the windows. 2 tables away, one of the college students was arguing with his girlfriend about something trivial. Their voices rose, drawing annoyed looks from other customers. Marcus found himself studying their body language, automatically assessing threat levels and exit routes the way he'd been trained to do. Old habits died hard, even when everything else was fading. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How's your morning, Dad? Mrs. Chen will be there at 2 p.m. to walk with you. Love you. Marcus stared at the message, feeling the familiar mix of gratitude and frustration. Sarah was trying so hard to take care of him, but every gesture of help felt like another piece of his independence slipping away. He'd spent his entire adult life taking care of others, his team, his country, his family after his wife Emma had died 5 years ago. Now he was the one who needed taking care of, and it felt fundamentally wrong. He typed back, fine. See you tonight. Short and simple, the way he'd always communicated. Sarah probably wanted more, some reassurance that he was okay, but Marcus had never been good with words when it came to feelings. The morning crowd was thinning out, replaced by a quieter mix of remote workers and retirees. Marcus recognized a few faces from previous days, or thought he did. Sometimes his mind played tricks on him, creating false familiarity or erasing people he should know. It was like living in a world that constantly shifted without warning. He returned to his journal, writing about the extraction mission that had earned his team a commendation. The details came back in vivid flashes, the smell of cordite and dust, the weight of an injured teammate on his shoulders, the relief of reaching the extraction point as dawn broke over the mountains. These memories felt sacred, too important to lose to the disease that was methodically erasing everything else. Marcus? He looked up to see an older man approaching his table, someone vaguely familiar but impossible to place. The man's face lit up with recognition and pleasure. I thought that was you. Bill Henderson, from the VFW meetings. We've talked a few times about your service. Marcus nodded politely, though he had no memory of this man or any VFW meetings. Sarah must have signed him up for something, another well-meaning attempt to keep him connected to his military community. Mind if I sit for a minute? Bill asked, already pulling out a chair. I was just telling my wife about that story you shared, about the hostage rescue in Somalia. Incredible stuff. Marcus felt a flush of panic. He had no memory of telling any story to this man, no recollection of a hostage rescue in Somalia. But Bill was looking at him with such genuine admiration and interest that Marcus didn't have the heart to admit his confusion. That was a long time ago, Marcus said carefully, hoping the vague response would satisfy Bill's enthusiasm. Time doesn't matter with stories like that, Bill continued. Real heroism, you know? Most people these days have no idea what guys like you went through for this country. Marcus nodded, feeling like an imposter in his own life. Was this how it would be from now on? People remembering things about him that he could no longer remember himself? His identity becoming a collection of other people's memories while his own mind betrayed him? Bill chatted for a few more minutes about military history and current events before excusing himself. As he walked away, Marcus felt a profound loneliness settle over him. Here was a man who knew stories about his life that Marcus himself could no longer access. It was like watching pieces of his soul scattered to strangers while he remained empty-handed. He closed his journal and gathered his things, suddenly, desperate to leave the coffee shop and its too bright cheerfulness. Outside, the Portland morning was crisp and clear, with the kind of blue sky that Emma used to say looked like hope. Marcus started walking without any particular destination, letting his feet carry him through neighborhoods that still felt foreign despite weeks of living here. The houses he passed were beautiful in their orderliness, each lawn perfectly maintained, each driveway showing evidence of normal, peaceful lives. Children's toys scattered in yards, newspapers delivered to front porches, the gentle hum of suburban routine. It was everything he'd fought to protect during his years of service, yet it felt as distant as another planet. His phone GPS guided him back towards Sarah's house, though he found himself taking a longer route, reluctant to return to the well-meaning supervision of Mrs. Chen. Instead, he found a small park and sat on a bench overlooking a playground where a few mothers watched their toddlers navigate jungle gyms with the serious concentration of small explorers. Marcus watched them and remembered Sarah at that age, how she used to insist he push her on the swings whenever he was home between deployments. Emma would pack elaborate picnic lunches, and they'd spend entire afternoons at parks like this one, pretending they were a normal family instead of one held together by phone calls and letters from faraway places.
"I miss you, Emma," he whispered to the empty air. "I don't know how to do this without you." Emma had been his anchor for 28 years of marriage, the steady presence that made everything else make sense. She'd understood his service in ways that few civilians could, had raised Sarah largely alone during his frequent deployments without complaint or resentment. When the cancer took her, Marcus had felt untethered for the first time in his adult life. Now, with his mind failing, that feeling of being lost had intensified into something approaching terror. Emma would have known what to do about the diagnosis. She would have researched treatments and support groups, would have organized his life around the disease with the same efficiency she'd brought to managing military moves and extended separations. Without her, Marcus felt like he was navigating uncharted territory without a map or compass. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unknown number. Marcus hesitated before answering, unsure whether it was someone he should know or a telemarketer taking advantage of his confusion. "Hello? Marcus Thompson? This is Detective Rivera with the Portland Police Department. I'm calling because we have a situation that requires someone with your particular background and expertise." Marcus felt a familiar surge of alertness, the old instincts kicking in despite his confusion. "What kind of situation?" "There's a hostage situation downtown. The perpetrator is a former Marine with PTSD, and he specifically asked to speak with you. Says you served together in Afghanistan. His name is James Martinez. Ring any bells?" Marcus closed his eyes, searching through the increasingly unreliable catalog of his memories. The name felt familiar, but he couldn't place a face or specific details. Afghanistan was a blur of missions and faces, some clear and others lost to time and trauma. I'm not sure I remember him specifically," Marcus admitted. "But I'll help however I can. We need you downtown as soon as possible. Can someone drive you, or should we send a car?" Marcus looked around the peaceful park, at the children playing and mothers chatting, and felt the weight of his old life calling him back. For the first time in months, someone needed him for who he used to be rather than treating him like a problem to be managed. "Send a car," he said. "I'll be ready." As he waited for the police vehicle, Marcus tried to prepare himself for whatever was coming. His training was still there, buried beneath the fog of his disease but not entirely lost. Maybe, for a few hours, he could remember who he used to be. Maybe James Martinez, whoever he was, needed to see the man Marcus Thompson had been rather than the diminished version he was becoming. The police car arrived within minutes, its silent approach and professional efficiency reminding Marcus of countless mission briefings and urgent deployments. As he climbed into the passenger seat, he felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the alertness of someone preparing for action. "Thank you for coming, sir," the young officer said as they pulled away from the park. "Detective Rivera will brief you when we arrive, but I wanted you to know that everyone at the department has heard about your service. It's an honor to meet you." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. But, as they drove toward downtown Portland, sirens beginning to wail in the distance, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with his failing mind and everything to do with the man he'd spent a lifetime becoming. Whatever was waiting for him, he would face it the way he'd faced everything else, with courage, determination, and the unshakable conviction that some things were more important than personal comfort or safety. Even if he couldn't remember every detail of his past, he could still honor the values that had defined him. The city blurred past the car windows as they raced toward an uncertain confrontation, and, for the first time since his diagnosis, Marcus Thompson felt like himself again. The downtown Portland streets were a maze of police barriers and emergency vehicles, their red and blue lights painting the gray morning in urgent colors. Marcus stepped out of the patrol car and immediately felt the familiar weight of a crisis situation, the controlled chaos of professionals doing their jobs under pressure, the tension that crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Detective Rivera approached them quickly, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of purposeful movement that Marcus recognized from his own years of command. She extended her hand with a firm grip that spoke of competence and respect. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Maria Rivera, lead detective on this case." Her voice carried the controlled urgency of someone managing multiple moving pieces. "Let me bring you up to speed on the situation." They walked toward a mobile command center that had been set up across from a 4-story office building. Marcus could see sharpshooters positioned on nearby rooftops, their scopes trained on specific windows. The perimeter was professional and thorough, but he could sense the underlying tension of a situation that could escalate without warning. James Martinez, 34 years old, Marine Corps veteran with 3 tours in Afghanistan, Rivera began, consulting her tablet. "He's got PTSD, lost his job last month, and his wife filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. This morning he entered the accounting firm where his ex-wife works and took 6 people hostage, including her." Marcus felt a cold recognition, not of the specific man but of the type of desperation that could drive a trained soldier to this point. He'd seen it too many times, good men broken by war and circumstance, pushed past their breaking point by a civilian world that didn't understand what they'd sacrificed. "What's he asking for?" Marcus inquired, his mind automatically shifting into tactical assessment mode. "That's the strange part," Rivera continued. "He's not demanding money or making political statements. He keeps saying he wants to talk to Marcus Thompson, the Navy SEAL who saved his life in Afghanistan. Claims you pulled him out of an IED blast in Helmand Province, 2009. Marcus closed his eyes, searching through memories that felt increasingly like looking through thick fog. Helmand Province, 2009. He remembered the deployment, remembered the constant threat of improvised explosive devices, but the specific incident eluded him. There had been so many rescues, so many moments when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. "I don't remember the specifics," he admitted, hating the weakness he heard in his own voice. "But if he says I was there, I probably was." Rivera's expression softened slightly. "The officer who called you mentioned you've been having some memory issues. Are you sure you're up for this?" Marcus straightened, feeling his old command presence reassert itself. "Detective, I may not remember every detail of my service, but I remember what it means. If that man in there needs to hear from me, then that's what we're going to do." A SWAT team leader joined them, a tall man with the lean build of someone who lived for high-stakes situations. "Ma'am, we've got eyes on the suspect. He's in the main conference room on the 3rd floor, all 6 hostages are visible and appear unharmed. He's armed with what looks like a military-issue sidearm and, possibly explosives." "Explosives?" Rivera asked sharply. "Can't confirm, but he's wearing what appears to be a vest under his jacket, and he's made several references to ending it all if his demands aren't met." Marcus felt the old calculation running through his mind: sightlines, entry points, civilian safety protocols. Even with his memory failing, the tactical training remained sharp, muscle memory that went deeper than conscious thought. "Has anyone tried to establish communication?" he asked. "We've got a negotiator on the phone with him, but he's only agreeing to talk in limited bursts. Keeps saying he'll only have a real conversation with you." Rivera gestured toward the building. "He's given us until noon, which is about 3 hours from now." Marcus looked up at the building, trying to imagine the man inside and what had driven him to this desperate act. Somewhere in that structure was a fellow veteran who believed Marcus Thompson represented something important enough to stake his life on. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like familiar gear. "I need to know everything you can tell me about Martinez," Marcus said. "Service record, family situation, what happened in Afghanistan. If I'm going to reach him, I need to understand who he is." Rivera nodded approvingly. Already working on it. We've contacted the VA and his former unit commander. Should have a full briefing within the hour. As they waited, Marcus found himself studying the building and the surrounding area with the automatic assessment of someone trained to see threats and opportunities. The accounting firm occupied floors 3 and 4 of what appeared to be a converted warehouse, with large windows that provided good visibility but also made the hostages vulnerable to outside observation. A young police psychologist approached them, carrying a thick folder. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Dr. Susan Walsh. I specialize in crisis negotiation with military veterans. I've been reviewing what we know about Martinez's psychological profile." Marcus accepted the folder, though he wondered how much of the information would stick in his increasingly unreliable memory. "What's your assessment, doctor?" "Classic PTSD case, complicated by civilian adjustment issues," Dr. Walsh explained. "He's been struggling with the transition ever since leaving the service. Multiple jobs, relationship problems, increasing isolation. The divorce filing appears to have been the final trigger, but this has been building for years." "Is he suicidal?" "Hard to say definitively, but the pattern suggests someone who feels he's lost everything that gave his life meaning. In his mind, you represent something from a time when he knew who he was and what his purpose was." Marcus nodded, understanding the psychology even if he couldn't remember the specific details. He'd seen it in himself after Emma's death, the feeling of being untethered from the things that defined you. The difference was that his anchor had been gradually eroded by disease rather than torn away by sudden trauma. The key will be reminding him that his service still has value, that there are still people who need him to be strong, Dr. Walsh continued. "But you'll need to be careful not to make promises about remembering him specifically. If he realizes you don't recall the incident he's fixated on, it could destabilize him further." "Understood," Marcus said, though the irony wasn't lost on him. He was being asked to help someone hold on to their sense of identity while his own was slipping away piece by piece. Rivera's phone buzzed, and she answered it quickly. After a brief conversation, she turned to Marcus with an expression of increased urgency. "Martinez is asking to speak with you directly. He wants you to come to the building lobby, unarmed, for a face-to-face conversation through the security glass." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, not with fear but with the familiar focus that came with mission parameters. "What's the tactical situation?" "Building security has been cleared. We'll have sniper coverage and a SWAT team in position, but you'll essentially be alone with him. If he decides to detonate whatever device he might have, you'll be in the blast radius." "That's not going to happen," Marcus said with the calm certainty of someone who had faced similar situations countless times. He wants to talk, which means he still believes there's a way out of this. "My job is to help him find it." Dr. Walsh looked concerned. "Mr. Thompson, given your memory issues, are you sure you can handle the psychological pressure? If you become confused or disoriented during the conversation." "Doctor, I may not remember every mission or every face, but I remember what it means to leave no man behind," Marcus said firmly. "That young man in there reached out to me specifically because he believes I represent something worth fighting for. I'm not going to let him down." Rivera studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks. "All right, we'll set it up. But you wear a vest, and at the first sign that things are going south, you get out of there." As they prepared for the face-to-face meeting, Marcus tried to center himself mentally. His training had taught him that the most important weapon in any crisis was mental clarity, the ability to read situations and people accurately. His memory might be failing, but his instincts were still sharp. A tactical officer fitted him with body armor, the familiar weight helping him slip back into mission mode. As they walked toward the building, Marcus could feel the eyes of dozens of law enforcement professionals on him, their hopes and expectations adding to the pressure. The building lobby was eerily quiet, with afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows onto polished floors. Marcus could see the elevator bank where Martinez was presumably waiting, though the man himself wasn't visible yet. The space felt like a stage set for a confrontation that could go either way. "Martinez!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority of command. "This is Marcus Thompson. I'm here to talk."
A figure emerged from behind a concrete pillar near the elevators, and Marcus got his first look at the man who had asked for him by name. James Martinez was smaller than Marcus had expected, probably 5'8" and lean, with the kind of controlled movement that spoke of military training. His face was drawn with exhaustion and stress, but his eyes were alert and focused. "Commander Thompson," Martinez said, his voice carrying across the empty lobby. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Marcus noted the use of his old rank, a sign of respect that suggested Martinez still saw him as a figure of authority despite whatever had driven him to this desperate act. "I always come when one of my people calls, James. You know that." Martinez's face showed a flicker of something, relief, maybe, or the beginning of hope. "You remember me, sir?" Here was the moment Dr. Walsh had warned him about, the point where honesty and tactical necessity might conflict. Marcus chose a middle path, one that acknowledged the truth without destroying whatever connection Martinez felt they shared. "I remember what's important, James. I remember that we served together, that we looked out for each other, that we brought each other home. The details might be fuzzy, but that bond is still real." Martinez nodded, and Marcus could see some of the tension leave his shoulders. "That day in Helmand, sir, when the convoy hit the IED. I was trapped under the Humvee, burning alive. Everyone else was either dead or too wounded to help. You came back for me." As Martinez spoke, fragments of memory began to surface in Marcus's mind like pieces of a puzzle assembling themselves. The smell of burning fuel, the weight of twisted metal, the sound of someone screaming. Not complete pictures, but impressions that felt true. "You would have done the same for me," Marcus said, and he meant it. That was the code they'd all lived by, the unspoken understanding that no one got left behind regardless of the risk. "I tried, sir," Martinez continued, his voice beginning to crack. "I tried to live up to what you taught us. But everything fell apart. The job, my marriage, everything. I can't find my way back to who I was over there, when everything made sense." Marcus stepped closer to the security glass, close enough to see the pain in the younger man's eyes. "James, listen to me. What made sense over there wasn't the war itself. It was knowing we had a purpose, knowing we were part of something bigger than ourselves. That purpose doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It feels like it did, sir. I feel like I died in that convoy and everything since has just been existing." "I understand that feeling," Marcus said, and he realized he truly did. "But you're still here, which means your mission isn't over. Those people upstairs, your ex-wife, they need you to be the man I knew in Afghanistan, not this version of yourself that's been twisted by pain." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, his grip on his weapon visibly loosening. "I don't know how to be that man anymore, sir. I don't remember how." "Then, let me remind you," Marcus said, drawing on reserves of strength he wasn't sure he still possessed. "You were brave. You were loyal. You never quit, no matter how bad things got. And, most importantly, you understood that sometimes the hardest battle is the one you fight to save yourself." Through the glass, Marcus could see tears forming in Martinez's eyes. The younger man looked like he was wrestling with something fundamental, trying to reconcile the person he'd been with the person he'd become. "Sir, I need you to know, what you did that day, pulling me out of that wreckage, it wasn't just about saving my life. It was about proving that I was worth saving. That's what I've been trying to find again." Marcus felt the weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that his actions in a moment of crisis had shaped another person's understanding of their own worth. It was both humbling and terrifying to realize how much impact a single decision could have. "James, you've always been worth saving. Not because of what you did in the war, but because of who you are. The man who risked his life for his country, who came home and tried to build a life despite everything he'd been through. That man is still in there, and he's the one who needs to walk out of this building today." Martinez lowered his weapon slightly, and Marcus could sense the moment of decision approaching. Everything would depend on the next few minutes, on whether the connection between them was strong enough to overcome the desperation that had driven the younger man to this point. "What if I can't find my way back, sir? What if this is all I have left?" Marcus thought about his own struggles with identity and purpose, the way his diagnosis had forced him to question everything he thought he knew about himself. "Then, we find a new way forward, together. But we do it as Marines, as brothers, as men who understand what it means to honor the sacrifices we've made. The building fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the barely audible hum of the SWAT team's radio communications. Marcus watched Martinez's face, seeing the internal battle playing out in real time, the struggle between despair and hope that would determine how this situation ended. Finally, Martinez spoke again, his voice steadier than before. "Sir, I need to know, after everything that's happened, do you still believe I'm one of the good guys?" Marcus looked into the younger man's eyes and saw not the desperate hostage-taker but the Marine who had served with honor in one of the most dangerous places on earth. "James Martinez, you are one of the finest Marines I ever had the privilege to serve with. Nothing that's happened here today changes that. Now let's get you the help you need so you can remember it too." Slowly, carefully, Martinez set his weapon on the floor and stepped away from it. The gesture was small but monumental, a sign that the conversation had reached him in the place where his true self still lived. Marcus felt a familiar sense of accomplishment, the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully against difficult odds. As SWAT team members moved in to secure the situation, Marcus remained at the glass, maintaining eye contact with Martinez until the very end. He had promised to help the younger man find his way back to himself, and that was exactly what he intended to do, even if he couldn't always remember the details of how they'd first met. The crisis was ending, but Marcus sensed that his real work was just beginning. James Martinez would need support and guidance in the days ahead, and Marcus was determined to provide it, regardless of what his own failing memory might try to take away from him. 3 days after the hostage situation, Marcus found himself sitting in the visiting room of the county detention center, waiting for James Martinez to be brought out. The institutional smell of disinfectant and fear hung in the air, reminding him of military detention facilities he'd visited during his years of service. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything look pale and lifeless. Detective Rivera had arranged the visit, understanding that Marcus's intervention had likely prevented a tragedy. Martinez had surrendered peacefully after their conversation, and while he still faced serious charges, his cooperation and obvious mental health issues would likely result in treatment rather than lengthy imprisonment. The heavy door buzzed open, and Marcus watched as Martinez was escorted in by a guard. The young veteran looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit, his face clean-shaven but marked by the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept well in days. When he saw Marcus, his expression shifted from wariness to something approaching relief. "Sir," Martinez said as he sat down across from Marcus, his voice subdued but respectful. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I told you we look out for each other," Marcus replied, studying the younger man's face. "How are you holding up?" Martinez shrugged, a gesture that tried to convey indifference but couldn't hide the vulnerability underneath. "County jail isn't exactly the Ritz, but I've been in worse places. The lawyer they assign me thinks I'll probably get time served plus mandatory counseling if I plead out." "And what do you think about that?" "Honestly, sir? I think I need the counseling more than I need to avoid jail time. What happened the other day, that wasn't who I want to be." Martinez paused, studying his hands. "I keep thinking about those people I scared, about my ex-wife's face when I walked into that office. I don't know how to live with that." Marcus nodded, recognizing the weight of shame that came with actions taken during moments of desperation. "James, I want you to listen to me carefully. What you did was wrong, and you're going to have to face the consequences. But that moment doesn't define who you are any more than your worst day in combat defined you." "How do you know about my worst day in combat, sir? Do you really remember what happened in that convoy?" The question hung between them like a challenge, and Marcus realized he was being asked to navigate the treacherous territory between truth and the therapeutic fiction that had helped defuse the crisis. He chose honesty, recognizing that their relationship going forward would need to be built on solid ground. "Honestly, James, my memory isn't what it used to be. I'm dealing with some health issues that affect my ability to remember specific events. But when you were talking the other day, pieces of it came back. The smell of burning fuel, the sound of someone trapped and calling for help. I may not remember every detail, but I remember the feeling of knowing I had to act." Martinez looked surprised, then concerned. "Are you okay, sir? What kind of health issues?" Marcus hesitated, then decided that if he was asking for honesty from Martinez, he owed him the same courtesy.
Early onset Alzheimer's.
I was diagnosed 6 months ago. Some days are better than others, but it's getting progressively worse.
The confession seemed to hit Martinez like a physical blow.
Jesus, sir.
I had no idea. Here I am dragging you into my mess when you're dealing with something like that. You didn't drag me into anything, James.
I came because you needed help, and helping my fellow veterans is something I can still do, regardless of what's happening in my head.
Marcus leaned forward slightly.
But it does mean that if we're going to build something positive out of this situation, we need to do it now, while I still can.
What do you mean?
I mean that you've been looking for purpose, for a way to remember who you are at your core. Maybe helping me deal with my own challenges while I help you deal with yours is exactly what we both need.
Martinez was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You're talking about some kind of partnership?
I'm talking about two veterans who understand something about loss and about fighting battles that most people can't imagine.
You've lost your sense of direction. I'm losing my memories. Maybe we can help each other navigate what comes next.
Before Martinez could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad, Mrs. Chin says you left this morning without telling anyone where you were going.
Please call me.
Marcus showed the message to Martinez, who read it with understanding.
Your daughter?
She's been taking care of me since the diagnosis. Hired a caregiver, moved me closer to her family. Everyone means well, but sometimes I feel like I'm being managed rather than living.
Marcus put the phone away. That's part of what I'm talking about, James.
Both of us are being treated like problems to be solved instead of people with something to contribute.
What are you proposing exactly?
Marcus had been thinking about this since the hostage situation ended, an idea that felt both risky and necessary. When you get out of here, whether that's tomorrow or next month, you're going to need structure and purpose. I'm going to need someone who understands the military mindset to help me maintain my independence as this disease progresses.
You want me to be your caregiver?
I want you to be my partner in figuring out how to live with dignity while dealing with things that are bigger than we are. Marcus's voice carried the authority of command, but also the vulnerability of someone asking for help. Mrs. Chen is a lovely woman, but she's never had to make life or death decisions under fire. She doesn't understand that losing your memory doesn't mean losing your core values.
Martinez looked intrigued but cautious.
Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not exactly a mental health professional.
And, given what happened the other day.
What happened the other day is exactly why this could work, Marcus interrupted. You reached out for help when you needed it, and you listened when someone offered you a way forward. Those are the qualities I need in someone who's going to help me face this disease. The visiting room was starting to fill with other families and friends, their conversations creating a low hum of background noise. Marcus watched Martinez consider the proposal, seeing the younger man's mind work through the practical and emotional implications.
What would that look like day to day? Martinez asked. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure.
But I know it would involve more than just making sure I take my medication and don't wander off. I still have knowledge and experience that could be valuable, but I need help organizing it and accessing it when my mind gets foggy.
Marcus paused.
And you need to remember that your service meant something, that you have skills and insights that the civilian world needs.
The VA has been trying to get me into a program for veterans with PTSD. Maybe that could be part of it?
Absolutely. But you'd be going as someone with a mission, not just as someone trying to fix what's broken.
There's a difference. Martinez nodded slowly. My ex-wife, she used to say I was different when I had something important to do. More like the man she married. Service doesn't end when you leave the military, James. It just takes different forms. Maybe this is yours.
A guard approached their table, indicating that visiting time was almost over. Marcus felt the familiar pressure of time running out, the need to make every moment count. I need an answer from you, James, but not right now.
Think about it while you're in here.
Talk to your lawyer about what would be involved legally. But know that if you decide to do this, you won't just be helping me. You'll be proving to yourself that the man who served with honor in Afghanistan is still there, still capable of making a difference.
Martinez stood as the guard gestured for him to return to his cell. Sir, can I ask you something?
Of course.
That day in the convoy, when you pulled me out, did you ever doubt that I was worth the risk?
Marcus looked into the younger man's eyes and saw the question that had been haunting him since his return from war.
Never, James. Not for a second.
And if I had it to do over again, knowing everything that would happen afterward, I'd make the same choice.
Even knowing about the hostage situation? Even knowing how badly I screwed up?
Especially knowing that, Marcus said firmly. Because it proves that life is complicated and that good people sometimes do bad things when they're in pain. But it doesn't change who you are at your core. As Martinez was led away, Marcus felt a sense of completion that had been missing since his diagnosis. For the first time in months, he had a plan that went beyond simply managing his decline. He had a purpose that transcended his own limitations. The drive back to Sarah's house gave him time to think about how to present this idea to his daughter. She would be worried about the practical implications, about the risk of depending on someone with James's recent history. But Marcus hoped she would also understand that this arrangement could give both men something they desperately needed, the chance to be useful to each other. Sarah was waiting for him when he arrived, her face showing the mixture of relief and exasperation that had become familiar since his diagnosis.
Mrs.
Chen sat nearby, looking uncomfortable about having to report his unauthorized absence.
Dad, you can't just disappear like that without telling anyone where you're going, Sarah said, her voice carrying the tone parents use with difficult children. What if you got lost? What if you had some kind of medical emergency?
Marcus sat down across from his daughter, recognizing that this conversation would determine whether his plan had any chance of success. Sarah, I need to tell you about an opportunity that's come up, something that could change how we handle the next phase of this disease. He explained the situation carefully, starting with the hostage crisis and his role in resolving it, then moving on to his conversations with James Martinez and the proposal he'd made. Sarah listened without interrupting, but Marcus could see her concern growing with each detail. Dad, this man held people hostage at gunpoint 3 days ago, and you want to invite him to live in our house and take care of you? I want to invite him to be my partner in facing the challenges ahead, Marcus corrected.
There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're asking me to trust my father's safety to someone who just had a complete psychological breakdown.
Marcus understood her fear, but he also recognized the fundamental misunderstanding at its core. Sarah, I've spent my entire adult life making decisions about who to trust in life or death situations. My memory may be failing, but my judgment about character isn't.
But what happens when your judgment does start to fail? What happens when you can't tell the difference between someone helping you and someone taking advantage of you?
It was a fair question, one that Marcus had been wrestling with himself. Then, I'll need people around me who understand what I'm trying to accomplish and who can help protect that vision even when I can't articulate it anymore. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications.
What exactly would this arrangement involve?
James would help me with daily organization, medication management, and maintaining my independence as much as possible. In exchange, I'd provide him with structure, purpose, and support as he works through his own recovery. It would be a partnership based on mutual respect rather than a traditional caregiver relationship.
And where would he live? That's something we'd need to work out together.
Maybe he could rent the apartment above the garage, or maybe we'd find something nearby. The important thing is that he'd be available when needed but not hovering. Mrs. Chen spoke up for the first time since Marcus had returned. Mr. Thompson, I understand the desire for independence, but caring for someone with your condition requires specific training and experience. This young man, however, well-meaning, may not be equipped to handle the challenges that lie ahead.
You're absolutely right, Mrs. Chen, Marcus acknowledged. Which is why this wouldn't replace professional medical care.
It would supplement it with something equally important, the understanding that comes from shared experience. Sarah looked torn between her desire to protect her father and her recognition of his need for autonomy.
Dad, I need to meet this person before I could even consider agreeing to something like this.
And we'd need to have clear protocols in place for medical emergencies and safety concerns.
Fair enough, Marcus agreed. James should be released within the next week or two.
When he is, I'll arrange for you to meet him under whatever circumstances make you most comfortable.
And, in the meantime?
In the meantime, I continue working with Mrs. Chen and following the protocols we've established. But I also continue exploring what this partnership might look like, because I think it could be beneficial for everyone involved. That evening, after Mrs. Chen had left and Sarah had gone home to her own family, Marcus sat in the quiet of his temporary bedroom and thought about the conversation. He understood his daughter's concerns, understood the risk he was asking her to accept. But he also knew that without some sense of purpose and autonomy, he would simply be marking time until the disease took away everything that made him who he was. He pulled out his leather journal and began to write, documenting not just his memories of military service but his hopes for how the remaining chapters of his life might unfold. If he was going to convince others that James Martinez deserved a second chance, he first needed to articulate why he believed it so strongly.
James reminds me of myself at a different stage of life, he wrote.
Not because our circumstances are identical, but because we both understand what it means to lose the thing that gives your life meaning and to struggle with finding a new purpose. The difference is that he's young enough to rebuild, while I'm old enough to help guide that rebuilding process. The words flowed easier than expected, and Marcus realized he was writing not just for his own memory but for Sarah, for James, for anyone who might need to understand why this unlikely partnership felt so right to him. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not against external enemies but against the assumption that broken things couldn't be made useful again. As he wrote, Marcus felt a sense of clarity that had been missing since his diagnosis. Whatever happened with James Martinez, the process of reaching out and trying to help had reminded him that even with a failing memory, he still had something valuable to offer. That knowledge alone made the risk worth taking. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the parking lot of the Portland Community Center, watching James Martinez lead a group therapy session for veterans through the large windows. The younger man moved with confidence now, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had walked through fire and emerged with wisdom to share. The transformation was remarkable, but it hadn't happened overnight. Marcus still had his difficult days when the Alzheimer's symptoms clouded his thinking and made simple tasks feel overwhelming. But James had proven to be more than just a caregiver, he had become a partner in navigating the complex terrain of maintaining dignity while accepting help. Their arrangement had evolved into something neither of them had initially imagined. Sarah approached from across the parking lot, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression she'd developed over the past months, a mixture of cautious optimism and protective concern. She handed Marcus one of the cups and joined him in watching the session. "How's he doing today?" she asked, though they both knew she was really asking how Marcus was doing. "Good day," Marcus replied, understanding the subtext. "I remembered to take my medication this morning without him reminding me, and I only got confused about where we were going once during the drive over." It had taken Sarah 3 months to fully accept the arrangement with James, and even now she maintained a careful oversight that Marcus tolerated because he understood her fear. The man she was watching slowly disappear had been the strongest figure in her life for decades. Trusting his care to someone with James's history had required a leap of faith that didn't come naturally to her. Dr. Martinez says the VA is considering offering James a permanent position coordinating their veteran outreach programs, Sarah mentioned, using the formal title that still felt strange to both of them. James had completed his court-mandated counseling within 2 months and had thrown himself into additional therapy and education with the intensity he'd once brought to military training. The VA therapist who had initially worked with him after the hostage situation had been so impressed with his progress that she'd recommended him for a pilot program training veterans to counsel other veterans. "He's earned it," Marcus said, feeling a quiet pride in watching the younger man find his purpose. "But I hope it doesn't mean he's planning to abandon our arrangement." "I don't think you need to worry about that, Dad. If anything, I think working with you has been the key to his recovery." Through the window, they could see James facilitating what appeared to be an intense discussion among the group members. His body language was relaxed but attentive, the posture of someone who knew how to listen to difficult truths without judgment. Marcus recognized the leadership skills that had made James a good Marine, now channeled into helping others navigate their own struggles with purpose and identity. The session ended, and James emerged from the building with several of the group members who were still engaged in conversation. Marcus watched him shake hands with each of them, offering what appeared to be individual words of encouragement before they dispersed to their cars.
"How did it go?"
Marcus asked as James approached them.
"Really well.
We had a breakthrough with Thompson, the Army vet who's been struggling with anger management. He finally opened up about what happened during his last deployment." James's face showed the satisfaction of someone who had helped another person take a difficult but necessary step forward.
"I think what we're doing here is starting to make a real difference."
Sarah smiled, and Marcus noticed that her interactions with James had evolved from suspicious tolerance to genuine respect. The community center director mentioned that attendance has doubled since you started the program.
"Word travels fast in the veteran community when something actually works," James replied.
"Most of these guys have been through programs that treat PTSD like a disease to be cured rather than a natural response to unnatural experiences. When they find a place where their struggles are understood rather than pathologized, they start bringing their friends." Marcus felt a familiar surge of pride, not just in James's accomplishments but in the validation of his instinct that the younger man's crisis had been a temporary derailment rather than a fundamental character flaw. The hostage situation seemed like something from another lifetime, though it had been less than a year ago. "Speaking of the program," James continued, "Dr. Martinez wants to discuss expanding it to other locations. She's asking if you'd be willing to help design the curriculum, given your experience with leadership training." This was the kind of request that highlighted both the possibilities and the limitations of Marcus's current situation. On his good days, he could still provide valuable insights about leadership, decision-making under pressure, and the psychological aspects of military service. On his bad days, he struggled to remember what he'd eaten for breakfast. "I'd like that," Marcus said carefully. "As long as you're willing to help me organize my thoughts when my mind gets foggy."
"Always, sir. That's what partners do."
The drive back to the house they now shared, James lived in the converted apartment above the garage, gave Marcus time to reflect on how much his life had changed since the diagnosis. The progression of his Alzheimer's had been slower than Dr. Martinez had initially predicted, possibly because the sense of purpose he'd found in working with James had provided cognitive stimulation that helped maintain his mental function. James had proven surprisingly adept at managing the practical aspects of Marcus's condition while maintaining his dignity and independence. He developed a system of gentle reminders and organizational tools that helped Marcus navigate daily challenges without feeling infantilized. More importantly, he'd become someone Marcus could trust to advocate for his wishes even when he couldn't articulate them himself. That evening, they sat on the porch of Sarah's house, which had gradually become their house as the arrangement solidified, reviewing the notes from the day's therapy session. James had learned to document everything carefully, understanding that Marcus's memory issues meant that insights and observations could be lost if they weren't captured immediately. "The Thompson case reminds me of something that happened in my unit," Marcus said, his voice carrying the distant tone that indicated he was accessing older memories. "We had a soldier who couldn't talk about a firefight where he'd lost 2 friends. Took months before he could process what had happened."
James looked up from his notebook. What finally helped him break through?
Marcus was quiet for a moment, searching through memories that felt increasingly like trying to grab smoke.
I think
it was realizing that his friends would want him to survive and find meaning in their sacrifice rather than being destroyed by their loss.
But I'm not entirely sure.
Some of those details are getting harder to access." This was the reality they both lived with. Marcus's knowledge and experience were still valuable, but they had to be captured and organized while they were accessible. James had become skilled at drawing out these insights and translating them into practical applications for the veterans they worked with.
"That's exactly what Thompson needs to hear," James said, making notes.
"The guilt he's carrying about surviving when his squad mates didn't is eating him alive. If we can help him reframe it as an opportunity to honor their memory through his own recovery."
"It won't cure him overnight," Marcus warned, "but it might give him a framework for moving forward. The goal isn't to forget or to stop mourning. It's to find a way to carry the loss that allows for the possibility of growth." As they worked together, Marcus marveled at how natural their partnership had become. James had developed an intuitive understanding of when Marcus needed help and when he needed space,
when his confusion was temporary and when it signaled a need for more substantial support. In return, Marcus provided the kind of mentorship and guidance that James had been seeking since leaving the military. Sarah emerged from the house carrying a plate of sandwiches, another sign of how their unconventional family structure had evolved. Her initial resistance to the arrangement had gradually given way to appreciation as she saw how much both men benefited from the partnership. "I got a call from Detective Rivera today," she announced as she set the food down. "She wanted to let you know that Martinez's situation has been officially resolved. The charges have been reduced to misdemeanors, and he's completed all the court requirements." James looked both relieved and uncomfortable with the reminder of his lowest moment. "I still can't believe how much damage I could have done that day." "But you didn't," Marcus said firmly. "You made a different choice when it mattered. That's what counts." The detective also mentioned that the department is interested in having both of you consult on their crisis intervention protocols, Sarah continued. "Apparently, your approach to the situation has become something of a case study in successful de-escalation." Marcus felt a familiar surge of purpose at the idea of their experience being used to help others in similar situations. What would that involve? Training officers and negotiators in dealing specifically with veterans in crisis. Using your insights about military psychology and James's understanding of what it feels like to be on the other side of that crisis. James looked intrigued but cautious. "I'm not sure I'm ready to relive that day in front of a room full of police officers." "You wouldn't be reliving it," Marcus corrected. "You'd be using it. There's a difference between being trapped by an experience and being empowered by the wisdom it gave you." As the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Marcus of desert sunsets in places whose names he sometimes struggled to remember, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction with the path his life had taken. The Alzheimer's was still there, still progressing, still stealing pieces of his past. But it hadn't been able to touch the core of who he was or his ability to make a meaningful difference in the present. James had found his way back to the man he'd been in Afghanistan, not by forgetting what had happened since, but by integrating all of his experiences into a new sense of purpose. The hostage situation would always be part of his story, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become the catalyst for discovering what he was truly meant to do with his life. "Sir," James said as they prepared to go inside, "can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Of course." "That day in the convoy, when you decided to come back for me, what made you think I was worth the risk?" It was a variation of the question James had asked before, but Marcus understood that the younger man needed to hear the answer again, needed to internalize it as part of his new understanding of himself. "It wasn't about calculating whether you were worth it," Marcus replied, choosing his words carefully. "It was about understanding that leaving someone behind changes who you are in ways that can't be undone. I came back for you because that's what Marines do, but also because I knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. And now? Knowing everything that happened afterward, all the mistakes I made." Marcus looked at James, seeing not the desperate man who had taken hostages 6 months ago but the dedicated veteran who spent his days helping others find their way through similar darkness. "Now I know that saving you was one of the most important things I ever did. Not just for you, but for all the people you're going to help in the years ahead." As they walked into the house together, Marcus felt a profound gratitude for the unexpected turns his life had taken. He had thought his story was ending when the Alzheimer's diagnosis came. Instead, it had simply entered a new chapter, one defined not by what he was losing but by what he could still give. The disease would continue its progression, and there would be harder days ahead when his mind would be less reliable and his independence more limited. But he faced the future with the knowledge that his life still had meaning, that his experience still had value, and that the bonds forged through shared struggle and mutual support could transcend whatever challenges lay ahead. James had reminded him of who he was at his core, not through restoring his failing memories, but by helping him discover that his essential character remained unchanged despite everything he was losing. And, in return, Marcus had helped James remember that a single moment of crisis didn't have to define the rest of his life. Together, they had proven that redemption was possible, that purpose could be found even in the midst of profound loss, and that sometimes the most important mission was simply helping another person remember their own worth. It wasn't the ending Marcus had expected for his story, but it was the one he would choose, given the chance to do it all over again. In the quiet of the evening, as James helped him organize his medications for the next day and Sarah reviewed the calendar of upcoming appointments and therapy sessions, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. He might not remember every detail of his past, but he had created something meaningful in his present that would continue long after his own memories had faded. The fight to remember who he was had become a fight to help others remember who they were, and, in that transformation, Marcus Thompson had found the most important victory of his long career in service to others.